Heaven is a place described as many things: paradise, a reward, pure bliss, but it's also described as everlasting, no end, eternity. And that scares the shit out of me. I didn't always feel that way, and honestly, if heaven really is the only option after death, I still hope I go there. Obviously, it's better than the alternative, but a small part of me hopes there are other good options. The reason eternity scares me now is largely because of the stories I've read and watched. Stories that try to imagine what eternity would actually feel like, both in hopeful ways and in horrifying ones. Eternity is something the human mind can't fully comprehend. We understand the word, but we'll never truly understand the experience until we're forced to live it. And many writers have tried to show what that might be like. Some comforting, some very much not. Honestly, neither version brings me much peace. So today, I want to talk about the stories that made me terrified of eternity, and why it should terrify you too. By the way, some of these stories aren't literally eternal in the strictest sense, but they depict spans of time so vast that the human mind can't even begin to comprehend them. And the first story that really made me confront this fear is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. I'm sure that the majority of you watching probably already know this story due to it kind of trending about a year ago, but just in case you've never heard of it, I'll quickly summarize. In the story, there's a supercomputer named Am, and he killed every human except for 5 and kept them alive by genetically modifying them for 109 years, and will not let them die because he wants to continue torturing them, so all the humans really want is to find a way to die. Eventually, Am lets them go search for food because they could still feel the pain of hunger. And at the end of the story, Ted, the main character, is able to find a way to kill the other 4 humans and let them escape this nightmare, and finally, rest. However, he is unable to kill himself, so with him being the only one left for Am to direct all of his hatred, which as he said, is a lot,
For you hate.
Am turns Ted into a blob monster thing that is unable to see, feel, hear, or do anything really except move around extremely slowly. And to even form a thought, it takes him a really long ass time. Also, Am made him immortal and unable to even attempt to die. So in the end, Ted is to be tortured for all eternity. This ending is interpreted by many people as the humans winning because they were able to technically escape Am and actually beat him. And while that's all well and good, I can't even attempt to see whatever message there may be because the concept of someone being in not just this insanely cruel situation of being turned into an unrecognizable jelly thing as the book describes it, but moreover, the fact that this will be his life for what is essentially eternity is what really stuck with me. When I first found out about this story, it was when I was in high school and stumbled across it on YouTube. And up until that point, I had obviously known about stories of people being tortured and stories with endings where the protagonist does not get a happy ending. But this was really the first story that ended in such a completely unhopeful way where you, as the reader, can't even think that, hey, at least her suffering will be over at some point. Because no, that's it for Ted, forever. If it was real, then Ted would still just be slithering around at negative 50 miles per hour, probably barely coming up with the thought that he is miserable. It was the first story that really made me consider the idea that maybe death was the better alternative. And unfortunately, that death would never come for Ted. But at the very least, and I do mean least, this eternal suffering was directed towards one person. But what if there was a story where this eternal suffering was not just inflicted upon one person, but a whole species, and that torture was passed on from generation to generation for millions of years? All Tomorrows, written by C.M. Kosman, is the story of how the human race is made to devolve into different monstrous animal-like species and evolve again from those species, if they even get the chance to, by an alien race called the Q. After pretty much starting from scratch, all of these evolutions, similar to real life, took the humans millions of years and millions of generations to even get to a fraction of what the humans were at their peak. Eventually though, they are able to evolve to the point of beating their oppressors and are able to continue evolving without disruption, for the most part, until they eventually disappear. That is the gist of the story, and I obviously left out a lot and really do recommend this story. But what I want to focus on in this story is just the way it's written, so that millions and millions of years of pure hell and torture of these new species is so nonchalantly glossed over. I remember when I found the video that explained the story, and while yeah, the images of different species and the way they were each individually tortured in their own way was terrifying while interesting at the same time, the thing that really caught my attention and scared the shit out of me was just how long it took for anything to happen in the story's universe. With each evolution, even small ones, taking millions of years with plenty of generations of these new species coming in and out without ever accomplishing anything except bring this new depressing species, the tiniest of a fraction, closer to evolving. And that evolution being so inconsequential, like an extra toe or something. That to me sounds like the most miserable existence. No shit, I know, that's obvious, but it's not just the species that they got turned into, and that species shit sandwich they had to deal with. Some more than others. Real quick, I'm just gonna talk about the species in this story that are the most horrifying and worst to be turned into. If you know the story, then obviously, the colonials is probably number one for pretty much all of you. And yeah, it's the same for me too. Fun fact about me, but I'm a germaphobe. So you could imagine that being turned into a block of flesh that is connected to a bunch of other blocks of flesh and being forced to basically be a sewage system for these aliens is not ideal. But hey, I'm sure if you don't have germophobia, then you'll be cool with it. My second most horrifying species to be turned into is the subjects, because, well, they are pretty much just used as living material to be turned into whatever the gravitals wanted to. They could even be used the same way the colonials were used. But hey, at least you have a chance to not be used as a living toilet. And my third worst species to be turned into is the Titans, because they look really gross. That lip thing is hard to look at. Oh, also they all got ice aged or something, I don't know. So yeah, I really just don't want to be a toilet. Who's with me? Also, who is y'all's worst species to be? I'm genuinely curious. Okay, back to the main topic. But besides just living in constant torture, it's also just the fact that new members of these species would be born with no possibility of accomplishing anything and die without ever knowing if the hopeless situation they were born into will ever change. This story is one of the most bleakest and hopeless stories I've ever come across. Even though, at the end, everything technically worked out, and it showed the perseverance of the human race or whatever. But you know how long it took to get there? Not too long, just 1 billion years. Incalculable numbers of freakish creatures being born and dying, not knowing that their species was once conquering the stars and eventually will again. The thought of knowing that my suffering isn't just going to end at me, but my child and their children and the children after that for basically an eternity, with there being nothing I can do to stop it and living a completely meaningless life, scares the shit out of me. By the way, I know I kind of stretched the definition of eternity for this section, with it not technically being an eternity, but I just really wanted an excuse to talk about this story because I find it very interesting and I wanted to know what y'all thought about it. But what if I was just a witness to this eternal suffering, and for me, it felt like just a moment? The Jaunt by Stephen King may not be the most popular story he's written, but honestly, it might be the one that I think about the most. Except for obviously It, but I mean, that guy is basically the mascot of horror books at this point. The Jaunt is a short story about how the human race made a teleporter that can instantaneously teleport a living being to anywhere they want. The story shows a family who is about to teleport to Mars, and to do that, they need to be put to sleep before they make the jump. And the son of the family decides to hold his breath when the sleeping gas comes and stays awake when he teleports. And when the family wakes up, this little kid now has white hair and aged eyes and tells his dad, "It's longer than you think." Because at this point, the reader has been told that if you travel without sleeping first, then you essentially experience eternity in a second for everyone else outside. So when the father sees this happen, he is obviously unable to do anything to help his son, who just a second ago was a little kid, who now looks the same for the most part, who is an eternity old and can't even comprehend what his son has gone through, and has to watch him die mentally when all he wanted to do was take his family on vacation to Mars. This story is alright. Honestly, it's not his best story, which makes sense since it's not that long, so it couldn't be too fleshed out. But that idea of experiencing eternity in a second, all alone, really stuck with me. I couldn't even comprehend that happening to me. But more than that, I don't know how I would be able to react if that happened to someone I cared about, especially my own kid, who would now outage me by like infinity. Honestly, all I could hope for would be that he does pass away, since there's no chance you would ever be able to continue living after something like that. But for real though, who is going to risk teleporting for a vacation when there is not a 0% chance that you might not fall asleep and end up experiencing everything and nothing all at the same time? No thanks. I think I will just go to Japan or something for vacation. There are many more stories that show the terrifying reality of the concept of eternity, like Junji Ito's story, Endless Dream, where over time, the guy falls asleep, he dreams for longer periods of time each time, and eventually dreams for millions of years in one night, in his own head, without end, until he dies, where, for all we know, he may very well still be trapped in that endless dream. Or even games like Dead by Daylight, where the survivors are trapped in an endless cycle of death, short-lived hope, and continuous mind-wiping so that they never even know how long they have been trapped there together and can't even keep the bond they would have formed. But who knows, maybe eventually the developers will let them escape if they ever add some dedicated story mode or something, instead of having to piece together story elements from some iridescent porn tape. But sometimes, eternity is shown as happy, hopeful, or at least bittersweet. But those stories still didn't really help me out with my fear. Probably one of the best known examples would be The Good Place. This show is awesome. I loved it when I first binged it about a year ago. But if you've seen the show, and specifically the ending, then you already know where I'm going with this. Spoiler alert for an amazing show. But in the end, after the main characters figured everything out and basically fixed the afterlife and now can enjoy it together, they spend what's basically an eternity and what could be a literal eternity together happily. But eventually, each one of them realize that they aren't happy in this completely blissful heaven, and each one of them chooses to leave and become one with the universe or something. And that's it for them. They basically cease to exist. Maybe. I'm not too sure if I'm wrong. Please let me know. Also, one of them continues living, doing their own thing, but that's a whole other thing. When I saw this ending, it completely broke me. It was somewhat a happy ending, and they all got to spend a long-ass time together. But it just showed that even in a place that is supposed to be the perfect place to live, even with your significant other, it will eventually get old.
On paper, this is paradise. All your desires and needs are met, but it's infinite. And when perfection goes on forever, you become this glassy-eyed mush person.
And when you decide to finally end your existence, the only option is to cease. I'm gonna be honest, this bummed me out, and it was a pretty depressing ending. But the show is still awesome, and I understand what the ending was trying to say, for the most part. But yeah, these eternal happiness endings sometimes leave some unanswered questions that my overthinking, scared of time brain needs the answers to. Like in one of the movies that has one of the most unsettling implications in its ending that I think about from time to time. That's right, Coco. Okay, let me explain. Coco is a good movie, and I don't think I need to explain the plot. But one thing that I always wondered about, even when I first watched it all those years ago, was what happens when they disappear and are forgotten. I mean, it's pretty much impossible for these dead people to be remembered after generations and generations. Like, do you or any of your family members remember your great-great-great-great-grandfather? I'm sure everyone said no, except that one guy who's trying to be different. We know you're lying, bro. But yeah, what happens? Do they just stop existing? Do they reincarnate? I know that this movie is based on Mexican culture with the Day of the Dead festival and stuff, and as a Mexican myself, I am kind of ashamed to admit I don't really know that much about my culture or the lore behind this festival. But I do speak Spanish, so at least I got that. Also, besides that, there is another thing that kind of weirds me out about this afterlife and would bum me out if that's where I went after I died. The fact that apparently you have to stay looking old if you died old in this universe. Like, what? So if I made it to age 109, I'm gonna be spending an eternity-ish as some old guy? And it would be especially awkward if I ran into my parents or other people I know if they died a lot younger than me. I don't know, it's probably just me, but it would suck if my parents still looked young while I was 3 feet tall after shrinking for the last 50 years of my life and looking old as shit. So yeah, Coco Eternity is a no-no. I thought that would rhyme better, but it didn't really sound good. But let's now talk about the eternity that reminded me of my fear, that made me start making this video, and that movie is Eternity 2025. This movie is pretty good. I mean, for what it is, I had a good time watching it. Kinda. Okay, sorry. I kinda skimmed it and watched a lot of it on TikTok when it popped up on my feed. But the thing that stuck with me was the main point of the movie, having to pick someone to spend eternity with. And after you choose an eternity to go to with the person you chose, that's it. If you regret your choice and want to leave, you get sent to the void, which to me seems kind of harsh. I mean, damn. But also, that means that you will probably never see your kids, your friends, or any other family again unless they chose to go into the eternity with you. Okay, so after writing all that other stuff about the Eternity movie, I decided to actually go and watch the full movie in a totally legal way. And now, I think I understand how the afterlife works in this movie. So basically, you die, and then a helper person explains everything to you. And by the way, I think it's funny that they are all dressed like SpongeBob. But after that, you pick an eternity to spend, well, eternity in. And for some reason, after you choose, you can never change eternities or visit other ones ever, or you'll be sent to the void, whatever that means. And if you want to see your parents or friends or anyone who dies before you, you will have to go to the eternity they went to, or else you'll never see them again. And if they went to some shitty eternity like, I don't know, Attack on Titan world, and you don't want to go there forever, then that's it. You will never see them again. And same goes for the people that die after you, like your kids. If they don't want to go to where you went, then you'll never see them. That is such a bummer, bro. But hey, if you have someone who you wouldn't mind spending eternity with, then you could wait until they die. But I don't have someone like that, so I don't think that's much better either. In general though, the worst part would be just knowing that all these eternities are pretty much just fake and manufactured. Anything I did in them wouldn't really matter. At least that's how I would feel. But besides that, this is definitely one of the better representations of eternity. It's also a pretty good movie too. By the way, I know it's for the movie to work better, story-wise or whatever, but the main characters pick the most boring eternities ever. Like outdoor world and suburban neighborhood world? Seriously? For eternity? That's so lame. If that were me, I'm picking fucking Dragon Ball Z world or, I don't know, Sonic the Hedgehog world or something. Am I right? What eternity would y'all pick? So yeah, those are some of the stories that have instilled this fear of eternity, or just an almost infinite amount of time passing in me. And you might be thinking, well, Frey, is there any representation of eternity that you wouldn't mind being where you end up? And yeah, there is one that I can think of right now. In Adventure Time Distant Lands Together Again, Finn has died and ends up going to the afterlife. And honestly, for as dark and shitty the Adventure Time universe can be, this afterlife pretty much has anything I could ever want. 1, you're able to choose how you look, whether it's a younger version of you or one of your past lives. So I don't have to live as an old guy. Check. 2nd, you can see all your family, friends, dogs, anything here if they have also died. So not having to pick between seeing anyone you want and being stuck in a shitty eternity? Check. And 3rd, and this is the big one for me personally, you can choose to reincarnate and start a new life whenever you want. And bonus, which may not apply to everyone, maybe it was only for Finn and Jake, but you might be able to reincarnate with anyone you want, so you'll be able to have another chance at life with your boy, or any other loved one you have. Besides this episode being amazing and making me cry every time I see it, it also showed me an almost perfect representation of eternity and the afterlife. You know, besides the whole lich problem, but my boys took care of that. You see, the main problem of eternity, whether it be eternal suffering or eternal happiness, is that it never ends. So being given the chance to relive a life where you can make new memories, mistakes, and find magic in the everyday mundaneness through reincarnation sounds amazing to me. So, do any of y'all feel the same as I do? Have you guys also read or watched these stories? What is your example of a terrifying eternity, or just simply long-ass time? What's the best? Because at the end of the day, to me, the best eternity is the one that ends. Was that a stupid closing line? Probably. Sorry. Alright, bye guys.